setting up. Let me just see. Brilliant. I think we are now actually live. Let me just double check. Yes, we are. Fantastic. Yes, and we've already got 10 people watching, which is wow, eager. So hello everybody. Hello to everybody that's already tuning in. Oh, sorry.
I can't hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
Now.
Okay. Sorry. Gremlins. That's half the fun of doing these things live. Well, hello to everybody who's watching. Thank you very much for tuning in. As usual, it is me, Alex Cox, for a very, very special live broadcast, and one that I've been personally looking forward to for a very, very long time. I'm thrilled to say that I'm joined with a very, very special guest, Professor Deborah Sugg Ryan, who is here to talk to me today about the history of the 20th century home and all the clues that are lying in plain sight that can tell you more about the lives of those who called your house home before you did. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me, Deborah.
Oh, it's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you. So I can see that we've already got quite a few people watching, so we might as well just dive in. But in terms of, I guess, the overall structure for today, we've got so much to talk about. I think the difficult bit is going to be squeezing it in to the allotted time. So for everyone that's watching, Deborah and I will be having a bit of a general chat about Deborah's research, her work, the fantastic work she's been doing on House Through Time and other television documentaries about house history. And then seeing how we get on for time, hopefully we will be able to answer some questions live at the end. So if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the comments, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to answer some live. And also at the very end of the broadcast, we will be announcing the winner of our prize draw, a fantastic prize, if I do say so myself, which is a copy of Deborah's wonderful new book.
I will now.
which actually I will let you tell us about, Deborah.
Okay. This is my book that is all about the semi-detached suburban house and the people who lived in it. So it tells the house history of very modest houses, and it's got a bit of a focus on design and decoration because I'm a design historian and they're the things I'm interested in. But this is very much about the everyday and ordinary people.
That sounds wonderful. Well, actually, I've just realised I haven't even given you your proper introduction yet. So, I'll read your bio, I guess. So, yeah, a little bit about Deborah. So, Deborah, a professor of design history at the University of Portsmouth. You have also been a consultant on all three fantastic series of A House Through Time. Very sad that the last episode is coming up. This series has been as great as all the others. I enjoyed every single minute of it. But Deborah's speciality is advising the programme on the various changes in architecture, design, decor in the house over time, but also how that influences the experiences of those living there as well. And your television appearances are numerous, I believe. You've also been on Inside the Factory with David Jason, which I believe some of our viewers may remember, A History of British Inventions, and also number 57, A History of the House. And another thing I thought some of our viewers would be interested to hear about as well is your work with the V&A.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. After you.
Well, no. Well, I started my career as a V&A curator many years ago in the late 1980s, and that's why I'm so interested in design and objects, because I've got that very hands-on experience of working in a museum.
And what was it, do you think, that first sparked your interest in the history of homes and domestic life?
Well, I originally trained as an art historian, and then, as I say, I was very, very lucky to get a job as a junior curator at the V&A back in 1987. It seems forever ago. And I ended up, the junior curators rotated around the departments, and I ended up in the V&A's archive of art and design. And I'd started getting much more interested in design rather than art, but also thinking a bit about lots of the histories of design I'd been reading, and lots of the objects I'd encountered at the museum were really posh objects, not the kind of objects that you and I would have in our homes necessarily. So I started thinking about the everyday and the ordinary, and my own family history as well has been quite important to all my research. And one day we got some boxes of a new archive to unpack, and I literally had a eureka moment. I opened the box, and these were the photo albums documenting the history of the Ideal Home Exhibition. So Ideal Home Exhibition, founded in 1908, the longest continuously running exhibition in the world. And the brilliant thing about the exhibition is it just documents pretty modest homes. I mean, they are dream homes, but they do reflect how we actually live. And I took an album out, I opened it, and I just went, wow, this is what I want to do. And I ended up cataloguing the archive, leaving the V&A, writing a PhD on the Ideal Home Exhibition, and then publishing a book. And I also curated a big exhibition at the Design Museum back in 1993 that was a retrospective. And I've been working on the history of the home ever since. So it's an obsession.
Well, I think the same often goes for family history, doesn't it? I think lots of people do describe it as obsession/addiction. And I guess one of the things that strikes me whenever I start learning a little bit more about house history is just how significant the overlap between the two is. You really can't separate them out, I guess.
No, I don't think you can. And in fact, one of the things that really motivated me was my own grandparents' stories. So my mum's parents, who are both from really humble working class backgrounds. My nana is actually still alive. She's 95, safe and well in a wonderful care home in Plymouth. And they were extraordinary. My granddad was from a Welsh mining community in North Wales, only spoke Welsh until he taught himself English to join the RAF before the war, quite a long time before the war, because it was either that or become a slate miner. And he met my grandmother, who was a Londoner from a very working class background. Her mum had been a domestic servant before she got married, and she was a WAF in the war. She was driving lorries, all 5 foot of her, and ferrying the men to base. And Granddad got in and got a lift and liked the look of her, so got in the driver's seat beside her, and that was that. Lovely story. Anyway, my grandparents ended up, they were in the Air Force for a long time, travelled the world, and ended up in Stevenage, Newtown in the 1970s when my granddad came out of the RAF, got a corporation house, council house in Newtown, and under Mrs. Thatcher's right to buy, bought it. And they, this was just such a dream for them because of the kind of backgrounds they came from. And they used to go to the Ideal Home Exhibition. And so that was one of the things that attracted me to it, because I wanted to tell the story of ordinary people like my grandparents and these kind of big shifts in the way we live in the 20th century, where people have the ability to improve themselves and their conditions, and particularly through the route of home ownership. So so that's been one of the real drivers to my research. And I think that connection between house history and family history is just fascinating.
Oh, well, you'll be pleased to know we've actually got a lot of people watching. The audience have turned up en masse. So just very quickly, just want to say hello to some of the regulars. So hello to Pat, Kim, Taz, Anne, Diane, Shirley. There's too many to read through. Elaine, but yeah, we've got quite an international audience. It's lovely to see people tuning in from the US, people from Australia. We're already having questions coming through, so we'll leave those for now, but we are going to try our best to answer as many as we can. And given that we've actually got so many people watching from the US, I figured this could be quite a nice opportunity to maybe explain a little bit more about your work with A House Through Time. Of course, everyone in the UK is very familiar with the show. We've actually had quite a lot of US viewers desperate to watch it and asking where they can. But yes, how did you get involved with the House Through Time?
Well, my involvement came out of some conversations with the development producer really quite a long time ago now. So we started talking, I'm just trying to think, back in about 2015, and she came across me on Twitter. I mean, I hang out on Twitter rather too much more than I should, and got in touch with me and just said, you know, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I was finishing my book then, and you know, tweeting quite a lot about it. I'm interested in developing a program on the history of the home. Can I have a chat? And we would have these regular chats, and she used me as a bit of a sounding board. And in the end, in about 2016, I got a phone call where she said, we've got this idea. And as soon as she explained the concept of a house through time, I just thought, yes, that's it. So it eventually got commissioned, and I got asked to be the series consultant with this particular role of advising on how the house changes, because we have an amazing research team. You know, we have Mel, who you had on last week, has done loads of work on the programme. We have Megan, who would be a brilliant guest for you.
We'd love to have her.
Yeah, she's amazing. But our Kat, who's our amazing research producer, does loads of the research herself. So I got involved, and I was used to a bit of a sounding board, and originally I was only going to be in one episode, and then they in the end, quite last minute, they said, actually, we'd like you in all of them. So I have this recurrent role to come on in each episode and talk about an aspect of the interior of the house, or the stuff in the house. It's what we as academics call material culture. So if you saw me in the first episode of this series, I was talking about how sugar came into the home in the 18th century in the form of these loaves. Unfortunately, I wasn't on this week's episode. I ended up on the cutting room floor.
Oh no!
I know, but we've been trying to cram in an extra 100 hours in 4 episodes. But I was filmed in the an amazing National Trust house, the Carlisle's house, talking about the role of Victorian servants connected with one of the stories we had this week. But you'll see me in the next 2 episodes. So it's been amazing. I mean, I am so proud of the programme.
The response has been fantastic, hasn't it? People are loving it.
Yeah, I mean, the viewing figures have been phenomenal this series, but I mean, you know, I would be watching it anyway if I wasn't involved with it. And I think the thing I am most proud about is that we don't dumb down, you know, that we are doing really quality history, because the other thing is other academics love the programme, teachers love the programme, kids watch it with their parents and their grandparents, and I love the way we're able to appeal to all kinds of ages, all kinds of people. And I think one of the things we do that's really good is that we talk about the process, we talk about the research process, we talk about the documents we use and how we found the stories. And I that's one of the things I love doing on that the programme does. I think it's really important that we explain that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, that's something that we love to see on screen. But I know I do believe it's led to a bit of an increase in interest. I mean, I'm sure are you getting approached more by people who are looking to do this themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I get a pretty steady stream of email from people, and we get lots of approaches with people with ideas of, you know, houses to feature on the series. But I increasingly am getting myself a bit out and about from a university setting to talk about house history. And we've also started, and some of you may know this, but I will give it a big plug. We started on Twitter 3 weeks ago, House History Hour, on Thursdays at 7 o'clock British time. So hashtag House History Hour. And we've also got a Twitter account called House History Hour, although it's HR, not hour, because I couldn't fit it in. And myself and Melanie Backham and a wonderful group of people that do house history for a full-time living. There are 8 of us involved with House History Hours. So please, we're on tonight. It's a bit frantic. And
oh wow, so are you off to do another one as soon as...
Well, we do. So it's a live tweet at 7 o'clock on Thursdays. Just join the conversation using the hashtag House History Hour. And what we've decided to do is we have a theme each week. So this week we're going to be talking about using directories for your house history research. We were incredibly lucky last week because we had Kat Fevers, our research producer from House Through Time, involved with us last week. So if anyone wants to search through the hashtag for previous tweets, you can find the conversation. But we've got loads of people doing house history joining us. We've also got loads of archivists joining us as well, which is just lovely. And you know, I think we've got, I looked this morning, we were up to about 475 followers. So please follow us. Fantastic. And please join in. And you know, we're there just for a chat. We want to hear your stories, but we're there to give advice, and all the big names in house history are all involved. It's amazing. You know, we names that lots of you will be very familiar with, like Jill Blanchard, Nick Barrett. Yeah. So we've got a fantastic group of people involved with us. So please do join us, because we're really trying to kind of grow the interest in house history.
And I think that's an important thing to do. You know, I like with family history, I think the more people that do it, the more the more understanding we all have of what came before. I think it has a very positive impact in the present. But yeah, you heard it, people. Please do tune in. I'm sure Ellie will post links in the comments as well, so you guys can find it very easily. But yeah, do get involved, spread the word, tune in. And is that 7 o'clock this evening, Deborah?
7 o'clock on Thursdays. I mean, once people start going out again, we may move it.
Yeah.
You know, but we thought we wanted to have it after a House Through Time, because we wanted to be able to pick up on things, you know, when that was on, that discussed the episodes. And I think we couldn't have a Wednesday because it's one place studies, isn't it, on a Wednesday? So we were trying to avoid other hours where people get together who might be doing similar research. But at the moment, it's on a Thursday at 7 o'clock British time for an hour. It is a bit frantic, but it's wonderful, and you know, we all really love it. And I think it's been great for us in lockdown as well.
Yeah, great way of staying connected as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Improve your skills and bond with others over a shared hobby. But I guess coming back to your most recent book, what was it? What was the spark of inspiration that led you to start this one?
Well, this book is about the interwar home. And when I was doing the research all those years ago for my PhD, the interwar period really sticks out. So it's the period between the First World War and the Second World War. And the reason it's so interesting in the history of housing in Britain is because this is the period where ordinary people began to become homeowners. And there are a whole variety of reasons for this, that there's this kind of desire after the First World War to improve housing, because one of the things they discovered when they called people up for service in the First World War is that the health of lots of working class people was pretty bad, partly because they were living in terrible slum housing. And so there was this slogan that emerged from the war called Homes Fit for Heroes, which some of you will be familiar with. But actually there is an associated term called Homes Fit for Heroines, because women also made amazing sacrifices in the First World War. So the government set up a commission to look into housing, and there were some reports on the standards of housing. And so two things emerge. You have social housing. We'd had some social housing before the war, and then you start having this concerted effort by local authorities to build housing, and the government introduces these standards for housing. And there was also a very interesting women's committee into housing standards where they canvassed the opinions of ordinary women. Yeah, really amazing, that I write about in the book. And because you had state housing, the private house builders had to respond to that and build as good, if not better, for a variety of reasons. You got this huge explosion in housing. So about 3 million houses built for private sale between the wars. There has never been as much housing built in as short a time before or since.
What was the rate like? Do you have any numbers? What kind of speed are we talking about?
Well, it really picks up in the early 1930s. But what they're able to do is they're able to use some of the prefabricated techniques that they developed during the war for when they were mass producing things.
Oh, wow.
Some of those kind of innovative techniques really help them. But
Amazing how
also,
everything's linked together like that, isn't it? I wouldn't have thought that wartime
really,
technological advances would impact house
really
building like that.
really interesting. And the other thing that's really key is the building society movement. So being able to borrow money brings home ownership in to people on quite modest incomes. And there are some really interesting regional variations in Britain. So take a place like Coventry. There was really good work in things like the motor industry. So you had people on doing these kind of manual occupations but earning a decent wage who were able to borrow money cheaply. So you have amazing levels of working class home ownership facilitated by the building society movement, and also very low interest rates. But other really interesting things were happening as well, that local authorities were sometimes granting mortgages themselves or lending people the deposit for their houses. And if you look at the ratio of income to house price, it is the most favourable. The early to mid 30s is the most favourable period for affordability of houses in history. It's really interesting. So home ownership starts at about 10% before the First World War, and it has more than trebled by the outbreak of the Second World War, which is really significant because a lot of that growth is in people from quite modest backgrounds. And you've also got the opening up of new occupations as well. So clerical work, banking, new kinds of work that people that might have done manual trades do, these more kind of lower middle class occupations. And along with that comes all these aspirations for a different kind of life. And if you think of, some of the stories we cover in House Through Time, we've done a lot of stories about multiple occupation, and there's one coming up in the next episode. So, the typical big Victorian, Edwardian or Georgian house that goes into multiple occupation, lots of families living together. These modest 3-bedroom, semi-detached houses allow these small family units to live together and have a better standard of living. Also things like birth control, really important. People can limit their family size, have a better standard of living. Mary Stopes is an important figure. So all of this, comes together to kind of create the market for this boom. And as home ownership levels rose, builders built smaller and smaller and smaller and more affordable houses in order to capture these new markets of homeowners. So when you're doing your family history, you might be quite surprised in what you find, particularly if you're looking in some areas of the country with some decently paid work. I'm not saying it's the case for the whole country, and of course there was a depression as well, but it's a really fascinating story.
I mean, I was amazed when I read those figures about how rare home ownership actually was. I don't think that many people realise that for pretty much most of our history, your ancestor was incredibly unlikely to actually own their own home. And that distinction between owners and occupiers is quite important, isn't it?
Yeah, and even if they were middle class, they still often rented. So one of the best sources for looking into this are rates books. Rates books are fantastic. Some of them you can get on Findmypast. They've been digitized and available. I live down in Southsea on the south coast. It was originally called New Southsea, the kind of posh bit of Portsmouth, and although not as posh as old Portsmouth, funny enough, it was a kind of new development in the 1870s. And the rate books that are in Portsmouth City Archives have been digitized for 1911, and it's really, really interesting looking at my street. I've just started trying to get my neighbours interested in doing the history of the whole street. We've got a WhatsApp group doing it at the moment, And what was really interesting, I discovered about my house is, I mean, my house here is really would be rubbish for a house through time, because it stayed in the same family from when it was built in the 1870s until the 1940s, and the daughter inherited. But what I discovered looking in the rates book is she not only lived and owned in this house, she also owned the house next door, which she rented out. And that was quite common as well for someone, you know, because that gave her an income. She didn't marry, and it gave her an income, and she kept house for her two unmarried brothers. And you know, that story is a really, really, really interesting one. So rate books are brilliant for kind of unpicking owner occupation.
Well, and thankfully so many of them are available online. I've done myself,
yeah.
as you said, we've got a pretty good collection ourselves. But you were talking before about your own home. One of the things I forgot to mention is, I mean, with the modern technology, it might look like you're sat in your own living room now, but you're actually not, are you?
No. So I'm going to ask you all a question. Do you know where I am?
We'll give you the correct answer at the end. I'm not sure if there's a prize involved for this one. You just get the respect of your peers.
Have a guess in the comments. Where is Deborah sitting?
You should have seen it before. You should have seen it before.
Yeah. No, it's good, a good one. Yes. So, but I'm going to say, well, so another thing to say is I've done a lot of history of my own home as well. So not just this one, but previous houses as well.
And I think, you know, I've had it myself in my parents' house. You know, when we've been renovating, you find old layers of wallpaper or an old slip of paper with I mean, we once found an old shopping list that had slipped between the floorboards, and you know, a lot of or bits of old porcelain discarded in the garden. Yeah. When you find these things, you often find yourself thinking, oh, if only these walls can talk. And so few people realise that with a bit of persuasion, they actually can.
Yeah, we've just had a wall knocked down, and my builders found some fag packets.
Really?
Packets, sorry for foreign viewers. Yeah, in the wall cavity. Brilliant. And they said, oh, you know, you like old things. We've saved them for you, and they're absolutely fantastic. 1870s cigarette packets.
Whoa.
Yeah, they're brilliant. And but I think the wallpaper thing is an excellent one that often, and we've got a cupboard under the stairs in this house with different layers of wallpaper, and I adore it. And wallpaper is obviously a brilliant clue to your house history. And in fact, there are some fantastic places you can go to help you. And the place I would recommend the most is the Museum of Domestic Design and Architecture, which actually is not a museum, it's an archive belonging to Middlesex University. Oh, wow. And they have a massive wallpaper collection, loads of which has been digitized, and they've got a lovely website you can search. And it was a major source for my book, because they've also got lovely things like furniture trade catalogues and estate agents brochures, and more photos in my book came from their collection than anywhere else, free to access, and a really, really good place to search. And I've actually done some work where I have looked at old photographs with wallpaper in them, and then old black and white photos in archives. And then I have gone to the Middlesex, to MODA, Museum of Domestic Design and Architecture archive, to look for similar wallpaper to really, you know, match the two together. Because seeing something in colour just, you know, transforms your view of the past. I think it's why we're so fascinated when you colorize black and white photos.
Yeah. Well, that's actually, oh wow, that's a fantastic tip for photo detectives as well. If you've got an old photo of a family setting or something in a drawing room, compare the decoration, and you're struggling to date that photo. I didn't know that was a resource you could use. That's fascinating.
Yeah, well, it's also very hard to find photos of interiors until the post-war period. I mean, that's another thing, because when I set out to write the book on the interwar home, I thought I would find loads of photos, and in fact, what I discovered was that ordinary people didn't have access to flash photography until after the war, really. So it's really hard to find photos of interiors. It's a real challenge, and I really, really trawled archives and picture libraries to find those photos. And what I discovered is you could find some nice stage photos of very posh upper middle interiors.
Mm.
And you could find brilliant photos of working class interiors because they had been documented as part of this concern about slum conditions. So somewhere actually like the Getty Picture Library has got some fantastic, we use a lot of their photos in A House Through Time. I do a lot of work on the photo research. I always work with the picture researcher quite closely. And you know, somewhere like the Museum of London has got some fantastic photos, but finding these kind of modest interiors in photos is really hard because people just didn't take photos indoors. I've got a friend who works on interwar gardens, and you know, she's so lucky because the gardening magazines all of the period all have these photos that people took of their gardens, but people didn't take them indoors. And the problem with using, I mean, I have used magazines extensively, so women's magazines, homemaking magazines, domestic advice manuals, but of course there you're looking at the ideal, you're not looking at the reality. Yeah. And that, I think, is the thing that is tricky, and it's also the thing that's very tricky. I mean, I always say to people, go and look, go and visit places. And in fact, I'm going to write a blog post for Findmypast about where you could go and visit. We've just had a chat about it, and I said, okay, let's do this one as well. But going to living history museums, and we've done a lot of filming for House Through Time. I've done a lot of filming in particular on location at places like the Black Country Living Museum and Beamish, and I think they're pretty good, but the only caveat I have is often someone will stage a room where everything is from the same period, and of course we don't really live like that, do we? No. You know, we have, because we decorate and then we acquire something else and we get given something, or you know, we're making do with something, so that kind of everything curated in one period, so it looks like a kind of room set in a department store, you know, like if you think of something like IKEA, and you know, that's what the furniture trade catalogue, often our representations of the past are not really how people live, so you just need to be a bit aware of that.
Oh wow, I hadn't thought about that. So like when you go to the likes of the Jeffrey Museum, where they've got those wonderful interiors, is that more of a kind of a model of the ideal home at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I love what the Jeffrey does, and it does it so well. And you know, it's now called the Museum of Home, and they were just about to reopen. And you know, I'm really looking forward to it opening again. They've been doing some fantastic work documenting our homes in lockdown over the last couple of months. But I think that a lot of what they have in their displays are about the design of a particular period, tied to a particular design movement, like the arts and crafts movement or something. Of
course, yeah.
And you know, they've got a 30s room, and it's very kind of, the style at the time would have been called modern. We tend to use the term Art Deco now, which I'm not terribly keen on, because it's an invented term from the late 60s, and it wasn't used in the 30s, and for me it's a bit imprecise. And they've got this lovely room set of a modern flat in London, and it's quite specific. It looks a bit like something you'd find in Poiret, you know, that kind of set, but I don't think it's very representative of how huge amounts of people lived. And so that's just, you know, and this idea, I think, and that was one of the myths I was trying to dispel in the book, that this idea that in the interwar period, our homes were this kind of riot of chrome and, you know, geometric Art Deco. It's not. Lots of people's homes were pretty similar to how they'd been in the 1890s, and you know, with lots of dark brown paint and dark colours and reproduction furniture, because furniture was a huge investment. You wanted it to last, so you didn't buy into trends. So what you often get when you start looking for pictures, when you can find them, is you get these extraordinary things where you'll get antique style reproduction furniture, and then you'll get this amazing riot of geometric, jazzy wallpaper. And to our eyes, we think, oh, that looks completely incongruous. But actually, it's not at all. That is how people live, because wallpaper was cheap. and it was also really useful for papering over damp.
Yeah,
And so we get all these layers of it. People didn't bother to strip it. And so often that was someone's nod to modernity, was to have this very up-to-date wallpaper and to be a bit fashionable. But when they bought their furniture, when they got married, it was expected to last. So you didn't necessarily make a punt on a very modern, you know, trendy style. You bought something that you thought was a bit timeless and would do its time. And I think, you know, that's what our homes are, much more kind of messy, aren't they? And complicated, and we have objects for all sorts of reasons other than aesthetic ones. So, you know, if you saw my real home behind this, you know, there's all sorts of things going on from different, you know, different periods in my house. So that's
same. I think just looking around my living room now, I've got items ranging from 3 months old to 150. And yeah, I think obviously that's what most people's homes are like. I love that, the whole concept of focusing in on objects though, because I guess it's not too different to, you know, discovering a piece of Roman pottery from 2,000 years ago that it might just seem like a shard of pottery, but if you really look at it, it can tell this much bigger story and shed light on the lives of the people who are using them. What kind of, like, I just wondered if you've got any specific examples of items that have really told a story.
Well, there are some examples in the book where I talk about this. I mean, I'm really interested in object lives, object histories, and objects as a repository of memories, and the way that we use memories to and memories become embedded in objects, and objects acquire different meanings through their lives, and that's something that really fascinates me. And you
quite
know,
romantic sounding, that almost.
Well, yes, yeah, and I think we've all got those objects, haven't we? I mean, why is the repair shop such a huge hit? You know, it is, you know, because we all love those stories attached to objects. So one of the objects I talk about in the book, and in fact there's one behind me in my real home, are wooden elephant ornaments, and there's a fantastic source in the Mass Observation Archive that some of you may be aware of. Wonderful mass observation project that was set up in the war to document ordinary people's lives, still going. They have they asked people to keep diaries, and they did a mantelpiece.
Oh yeah, they did one at the start of the lockdown, didn't they?
Yeah, and they did a mantelpiece survey in the 30s that they've repeated a couple of times. So it's a brilliant source for me for the book. You know, what do you have on your mantelpiece? And one of the objects I talk about are ebony elephants, and they come up as the most popular object in the mantelpiece survey. What does an elephant mean? An ebony, or sometimes they were made of teak, and I've got a section in the book where I talk about that. And one of the things I talk about are the kind of thinking about where the elephant would have come from and the kind of networks it would have come through. And of course, in the interwar period, so many families had a connection with the British Empire. You know, we've had this huge empire that's beginning to go into decline, but so many families have a connection through there, through people who have emigrated, through people who work in import-export businesses, and through people in the services as well. And then the other thing is these objects are also available so they may have come into homes because someone has brought it back or sent it back. Or you've got something like the Army and Navy stores that were selling elephants, in ebony elephants, in their mail order catalogue. So just from that one object, you can tease out a really interesting history. The term I use in the book is, I say, the detritus of empire washed up in the British home. And
I like that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you think of all that kind of colonial stuff and imperial stuff that we had in the home because of these amazing, you know, this amazing trade across the world. And of course we still have a lot of those links through the Commonwealth now, and so many of us have family in other places through these kinds of networks. And anyone who comes, I mean, I come from a service family, and you know, that's so important to my family history. You look in my grandmother's jewelry box, and it's full of bits of jewelry that my grandfather bought when he was in the RAF, and her brother bought when he was in the Navy. And you know, so I think it was something I really wanted to write about, was about those connections between home and empire.
Well, what we've been talking about certainly been echoing with viewers, as well as more people showing truly how international the audience is. We've got people watching in Japan, Denmark, Norway, all over the shop. But yeah, everyone's just chiming in to say about all the various items they have in their home that hold sentimental memories or stories from 3 or 4 generations ago. Lots of people as well sharing examples of things they've discovered while renovating, bundles of horsehair in the walls, old fittings for gas lamps. I mean, you've done a lot of renovation yourself. I guess when people are renovating, most people probably aren't thinking about keeping an open eye out for these kind of visual clues. What would be, anybody who's using the lockdown to do a bit of home improvement, what would be your advice? What are the things to keep a careful eye out for?
Well, I think wallpaper is an obvious one, and you know, and the nice thing with wallpaper is you can make it into a bit of a feature as well. So if you find a lovely intact piece, and I've seen this done and it looks really nice, you can neaten it up and put a little picture frame around it.
Oh, that's a lovely idea.
It's a really nice thing to do. Do photograph it as well. I mean, I moved to my current house. I've been here, getting on for 3 years now, but I moved here from Cornwall, and I lived in a place in Cornwall called Penryn in the south coast.
Oh, I know it.
Yeah, just near Falmouth. And labour of love, for a decade, we did up the most extraordinary house. So the oldest bit of the house was 1450.
Whoa!
Yeah, amazing. Cob cottage, extended into a Georgian house in the 18th century. So they built out and up. So on the outside, it looked like a 3-story, very austere Georgian residence, granite fronted, with a typical square Georgian drawing room, and then you had to bend your head to go through a doorway into what was the original cottage made of cob. And we had so many discoveries in this house. I mean, we had a priest hole. Amazing.
Oh, what, an actual priest hole?
An actual priest hole that was in our in the wall between our front, because the first floor drawing room, because remember, this period drawing rooms are always on the first floor, something I always telling the House Through Time production team, and there was a kind of space between that bit of the house and the other bit of the house, and we had been told that there was a priest hole there by the previous owners, and when we did some renovation and we took some plaster board off the walls, we discovered it. And in actual fact, our ensuite bathroom encompassed it, and we opened it up and the loo was in there. So brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We had a shaped ensuite bathroom because it was this amazing sort of recess, because the house had these incredibly thick walls, in some points were 1 metre thick. My best discovery was when we stripped the wallpaper in the front room, there was hand painted decoration on the original paint on the walls. In each corner there was scroll work, absolutely beautiful. And I did a bit of research into it and consulted some specialists, and they concluded that it was something apparently that women and daughters of the house often did, probably not done by a professional decorator.
What era are we talking?
This was probably about 1810, kind of turn of the 19th century. So that was amazing. And then the other thing we did in the cob bit of the house is we had terrible problems with damp, and it had modern plaster, and we took it all off and got down to the original cob, and that is just amazing, you know, because you see probably horsehair, but maybe human hair, you know, and mud and
a DNA test coming on.
Yeah, and just built of anything they could find. So bits of granite, and Penryn had a college that had trained priests that was destroyed in the Reformation, and so probably bits of Glasney College, you know, were used in the construction of the house. That was quite common in Penryn. So you know, I was incredibly lucky with that house because there were so many extraordinary discoveries. But you know, the kinds of things it's quite common to find things etched into glass, you know, things on beams. If you're knocking walls down, always have a good look. As I said, my builders found the cigarette packets, but it's quite common to find things in walls. Old newspapers are really good, often used under floor coverings or under floorboards. So yeah, loads of things that can be, you know, discovered in that way. And the other thing I would say too is, you know, if you do discover things, and particularly if you're looking at a 20th century house and you've got older neighbours, one of the best ways to interview people, and it's the same with objects, is take them an object. It is just, if you're into doing oral history, it is my top tip, take an object. Because if you get someone to talk about an object or a photograph, but have props, you will get much more out of your interviewee than if you just go and ask some questions. It's really interesting.
Triggers memories, just
yeah,
the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, I wish we had longer. Looking at the time, I think we're definitely going to have you back. But before we take a look at some questions, two more things I wanted to ask you about. One was one of the things you hinted on at the start about how the structure of the home kind of impacted things like life expectancy. I mean, when you said that about the First World War, it made me think, because when you look at those World War I service records, the chest measurements and the heights of these young men is so striking compared to the size of people today. So I just kind of wondered what do you think are the major developments during that interwar period that kind of impacted families?
Yeah, I mean, I think the developments around technologies are really, really important. So the move from cooking on solid fuel on a range to cooking with electric or gas is really significant, and lighting with electric as well, because homes were so dirty when they were lit with gas. Sorry, with gas at the earlier period, and also when we cooked with coal, ceilings were filthy, surfaces were dirty, and that makes a really big difference. You know, if you read accounts, your curtains got dirty, all of that, and all the hard work of keeping fires going. You know, having to get up in the morning to lay fires and things like that. So that is huge in terms of how things change. And then the other one, and in fact my story on House Through Time next episode is about bathing. You know, how do we keep clean? Because you have to remember that for lots of people who would have moved into these new houses, who lived in multiple occupation before, they probably had a privy in the backyard. They probably had to fill up a tin bath in the kitchen to have a bath. So an indoor bathroom is amazing, you know, to keep clean, sense of privacy as well. So those,
I guess safety within the home. Boiling water for a tin bath could be an accident waiting to happen, couldn't it? And you look at the amount of deaths with people's dresses catching fire from fireplaces or tripping down staircases that weren't uniform. And
oh yeah, well, accidents in the home are you know, a really big deal. So and then the availability of technologies as well. So the availability of electrical appliances. Now, note of caution there, and it's something when we go and film on location, I often have to say, take that out, because it's really interesting. In Britain, electrical appliances for lots of ordinary people didn't really take off until after the Second World War because they were expensive. And until we got the national grid, this is one of my favourite facts, and everyone's always amazed by this, until we got the national grid, voltage could be different from town to town. So if you lived in Birmingham and you bought an electric iron and you moved to Wolverhampton, your iron might not work because the voltage was different.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So when did that become uniform?
Well, this was all with the creation of the national grid that voltages started standardised. So the most common electrical appliances up until the Second World War are electric irons, but they're often just plugged into the light light fitting, because not many houses had sockets, and then curling tongs were the other one that was the most popular. But lots of people were still heating irons on their, if you had a gas stove, you might still use a flat iron and just heat it on the, or light the burner on the gas stove. So although things like hoovers were available, and washing machines and fridges, lots of people didn't have them until the Second World War. And it's the same with fitted kitchens as well. And, you know, the war has such an impact. And I think the other thing to just be really aware is rationing goes on for so long. Yeah. There are so, you know, right into the 50s, there are so many restrictions on what the V&A had an exhibition in 1946 to showcase design called Britain Can Make It, and the press called it Britain Can't Have It, because it had all these lovely things that people saw, but people, you know, people were really poor. So just be aware that the representations you see in film, particularly in American film, are not how a lot of us were living here. And in fact, I've got a very good story in episode 4 about wartime Bristol for House Through Time that brings this to life.
Oh, no spoilers. and talking about the war, I thought we should probably briefly touch on how useful the 39 register can be, because I know you've just written a blog for us, haven't you, on this very subject?
Yeah, so the blog is published very soon. I think it's published tomorrow. I've sent it in, so I think it's being edited as we speak. Yeah, I mean, a deep dive into the 1939 register, because I wrote the first edition of my book before it came out, and in the second edition, which has come out recently, I wrote a new introduction. I used the 1939 register to go back to the stories I told of house history, and I think the 39 register is just terrific, because, you know, you get people's occupations, which is so fantastic. So you can update, you know, if you've only gone up to the 1911 census, you can find out so much more. You also the key thing with 39 register is don't just look at the transcription, go to the original visual image. And what you'll see in the right hand side is you'll see annotations if people have signed up for war work. So you might see someone has signed up to be a fire warden or an ambulance driver, because the register was taken just after the war broke out. So that gives you a lovely insight. And the other thing the register was used for is when the NHS was set up, our medical numbers, when we got our NHS numbers, they used the 1939 register to help them allocate them, and women's married names have been annotated on the register. And that is just so brilliant, because it's so often so difficult to find a married name. And the other thing, I just think it really opens up house history, because if you live in a post 1911 house, you can find out. But actually the other thing, that one of the projects I'm trying to get off the ground in Portsmouth is we were really badly bombed here in Portsmouth in the war. Portsmouth Blitz was awful. 10% of Portsmouth's housing stock was destroyed, and you go down a road like mine, and you'll see all these Victorian terraces, then you'll suddenly see a bit of infill, a much newer house. And so I think a really fascinating thing, if you live in one of these cities that was bombed, you know, why not research the history of what was destroyed on the site of your house? I just think the 39 register just opens up so many possibilities for research. It's wonderful.
I love that. I can think of examples now back in Liverpool, where I grew up, because obviously Liverpool was bombed very heavily too. These odd houses that didn't quite fit the tone of the rest of the same street, and it probably, as you said, it probably was a result of bomb damage during the Blitz. I love this idea that while our homes are our homes, I guess we share them with those who came before and people who are yet to come as well.
Well, our homes have their own lives, you know.
That's a better way of describing it. Our homes have their own lives, yeah. And you know, we're just visitors. I love that. Well, I think that leads us on very nicely to questions. I mean, I had so much on my notes that I really wanted to ask you. I think we're definitely going to have to get you back on, Deborah, and maybe next time we go for even longer, because I feel like we've only been talking for a few minutes, let alone 53. But we've had some quite funny answers to a question ranging from Mr. Bean's living room to my nan's house. But Samantha Rossetti, you got it right, along with a few others. It is indeed Margot's living room from The Good Life.
Yeah.
But we've also, oh, sorry, what were you saying, Deborah?
No, well, this is wonderful. You can download these from the BBC website. It's called The Joy of Sets. It's fantastic. So there are loads more I could have chosen, but I particularly like this one because it's a bit, although I should have really put on one of my 1970s caftans to, you know, be the part in it.
Oh, maybe for next time. I might hold you to that. But yeah, we've had loads of questions through. Obviously, we won't have time to answer them all, but so thank you for everyone who's been sending them in. But a very nice general one, I thought this would be an easy one to answer, is this is from Rosie. Rosie said, this is just a general question, really. Do you have a favourite design period? And if so, why?
Well, I love what people tend to call now mid-century modern, but that term is used to cover a whole load of things, the sort of post-war period going right into the 60s, even the 70s. People tend to lump things into that term, but what I really love is, and it's so influenced by my grandparents, I have to say, because their house was decked out in this style, their Stevenage Corporation house in the late 60s, early 70s. So that kind of very pared back, very elegant Danish furniture. I have loads of it in my house. That's what it's full of. I used to have a 1930s house and everything 30s, and I haven't got much of that left anymore. I don't have everything all from the one period. I do mix things up a bit, but yeah, that's the period I love. Is that just that kind of pared back Scandinavian? But you know, I'm sitting in my dining room at the moment. There's a load of ladder racks behind me. Amazing floating, that was British, made by Staples, kind of late 60s. I've got a Trekikov on the wall, which is such a cliche for a design historian, but I do a Trekikov lady on the wall, you know, and a bit of mid-century wall sculpture as well. I love Mad Men, so if you're into Mad Men, Don's bachelor pad in Mad Men, you know, wow, that kind of styling, I love it. So that's what I'm into.
Don was a stylish chap, so I mean, it sounds like you've got very good taste. Another question from, I think it's from Mark, which was, if you could name one domestic object that's transformed family life in the past century, what, more than any other, what do you think that would be?
Oh, that's really, really interesting. I would say the washing machine. I just think more than, I mean, wash day was such hard work, so, you know, awful. Usually a Monday, usually took all day. And one of the bits I've got in my book is from this mass observation diary written. It's a brilliant find. It was one of those Eureka archive finds because it's written by a woman who hates housework. So she explains it in great detail. But I just think the washing machine is probably the most transformational for women's lives, certainly. Because
of the time that it saved and allowed.
Yeah, a genuine labour-saving device. Because the problem with that idea of labour-saving devices is that sometimes they're not necessarily saving labour, they're just enabling you to do things to a higher standard and creating. I mean, it's really interesting. If you look at all the studies of the time we spend on housework, we don't spend much less time than we did 30 years ago, even with all this new technology. Yeah, because we just do it to a higher standard and we do more stuff. It's really interesting.
So our ancestors led slightly grubbier lives than we did.
Well, I think standards are very different. But you know, the big change is women going out to work. Obviously, that and the loss of domestic servants as well. That's another huge change.
Got another question here, which I'm gonna rephrase slightly. So Karina Husby is basically saying how she loves all the red brick houses in Battersea, and just wondering how old they were. So I know things like a red brick house can be quite an easy way of identifying. What, as well as answering that, what other outward signs on the exterior of houses can be used to very easily date something?
Yeah, well, I think windows are a really good one if you can see original windows. Obviously, so often they've been replaced, but style of window is a really good one. Sashes are pretty obvious.
Is that very Victorian sash, is it?
Georgian, Victorian, they've really moved over to casement windows pretty much in the early 20th century. Front doors, if you can see original front doors, they're often really, really good way of dating a building. And then, I think the thing is that you get multiple styles happening at the same period. So it's not as if you've got one style characterizing a single period. I think there's a very distinctive kind of Georgian style of urban architecture that we're all very familiar with. But I think there are more decorative styles. I think one of the things that's really fascinating are regional variations. So
really?
Yeah, so often there are very specific colours of brick that come from different places, different parts of the country, using different materials like flint, use of tile, decorative ceramic tiles sometimes in the facade. So and if you look at our current house for House Through Time in Guinea Street, what you've got there is a really interesting influence of a Dutch style. If you look at the facade with the shape of the bit on the top. In fact, I'll give you a little thing. I was so pleased they chose that house for such a frivolous reason, because I have a skirt covered in a pattern of houses, which is what I'm wearing next week. And I was like, yes! When I saw
I identify my dress.
I've been saving this skirt till we get a house in Dutch style that looks like it, and we've got one.
I love the fact that so much thought goes into it. That's brilliant. I personally loved season 1 because season 1 was, I used to live literally about 100 yards up the road from there, so know the area really well. But yeah, I guess a final question, which isn't actually from our viewers, this is from me, so this is a bit of an abstract one. Given that there's been so many fundamental changes to the way we're kind of living our daily lives recently, how do you see the design of the home evolving in the future?
Oh, wow. I think we're just living in the most extraordinary period of history, aren't we? The period we're living through at the moment, people are going to be writing about it in 100 years' time. And, here we all are, connected via Zoom, and more of us are working at home. And I think what is so interesting, so that might change the way we use our houses, but we're also in the middle in the UK of some really big social changes, because home ownership is actually in decline and has been in decline since the 2008 crash. So that's really interesting. We're down, and social housing is really in decline as well. After Right to Buy devastated it, and councils haven't been spending their money on more social housing. So more young people are in multiple occupation than maybe used to be. I was talking to someone about this morning, and we were talking about some of our younger colleagues who, I bought a house shortly after I finished my PhD. I don't see my young colleagues being able to do that now. Lots of them are in shared houses. But I think adapting our houses to work at home, and I think a lot of people are thinking now that when what we're going through at the moment eases and we do feel we can start commuting and going back to work, I think lots more people will try and work at home if they can, because this technology has opened up. So I think that is really interesting. And then I think there are some big changes coming in the kitchen. So I'm writing about the history of the kitchen at the moment for my new book, but I've also been thinking about the future of the kitchen. And there's a lot of very interesting smart technology coming on. I mean, lots of you, I'm sure, have got an Alexa or, whatever it is. domestic assistant helping you in your homes. And there are some really interesting things coming on in the kitchen with the integration of some of this technology. And I've been working quite a lot with some sort of kitchen futurologists. And I was involved in a big exhibition at the V&A last year. I was on the advisory panel too about food, the future of food. And one of the things that is coming, which is really fascinating, is that you won't have a hob in your kitchen anymore. You'll just be able to put, and you won't have sockets, and you'll just be able to put a saucepan down on any surface and it will be able to heat. And
oh wow, like you're in that. Oh, that sounds like something from Star Trek.
And that is coming, and things like recipes being projected onto work surfaces, or kinds of guided cooking. There are some really amazing stuff coming in the kitchen. However, this is my big however, how often do we change our kitchen? You know, we do kind of expect when we spend a lot of money on a kitchen that it's
going to last.
It's going to last. So I think some people will adopt these new technologies and some won't. And then I think, you know, the other thing I think is just so important, because I teach design students. I've spent my entire academic career, and not in a history department, teaching designers design history. So I educate product designers, textile designers, fashion designers, interior designers, architecture students. That's always been the context in which my academic, so I talk about these issues with my students, and sustainability is just the biggest issue. Yeah. We have to think about how we use our homes, you know, and that I think is just so important. And I think retrofitting something as well, thinking, you know, do we always want something new? And one of the things that drives me to buy old furniture and to wear vintage clothes is because I don't want to just have more stuff. I mean, I love stuff, I love things, but I'm also quite worried about the future. And I think people, you know, we look like we're heading into a recession. People are going to be poorer. I think people are thinking, there was some polling last week. I think shopping maybe is going to be done quite differently as well, and our attitude towards stuff, because what we all want to do at the moment is be with our families.
Yeah.
That's, you know, I think most.
And that's what homes should be for, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, that's I think that's quite a nice note. Oh, actually, does that the book you're currently working on, is it a working title? Do you have a title yet? Anyone?
Well, my working title is The Heart of the Home. So that's and it will have some kind of subtitles. So I'm working on it at the moment. It won't be out probably for a couple of years. So
okay.
I'm right in the middle of it, but it's a book telling the story of the modern kitchen, not just in Britain, but across the Western world. So I'm going from about 1850. So I'm telling, you know, from kind of mass production and industrialization to the present. And I will end by thinking about the future. So that's my kind of current work. But I'm sort of doing lots of bits about, and in fact I'm going to share a bit about research with Findmypast in another blog.
Yay!
I won't tell you about it yet because it's connected to episode 4 of A House Through Time. But I've been thinking about how we cook and how at different times in history.
Oh, that's not well. We will eagerly await that. And a reminder to everybody else. Deborah's book, Ideal Homes, Uncovering the History of Design of the Interwar House, is available at all good online retailers. Is that correct? I know you can definitely buy it on Amazon, because I had a look before.
Buy it on Hive. Buy it on Hive. Hive is fantastic, because what Hive does is it supplies the book from an independent local bookseller. So you're giving your money to a local business that may well be struggling. So, you know, please buy the book wherever you can. But if you can buy it on Hive, you're supporting an independent business, and they need our support.
Well, that's where I'll get my copy from. And I can announce, drum roll, that our winner of the prize draw for a copy of Deborah's wonderful book is Jenny Phillips. So if you're watching, big congratulations, Jenny. Jenny sent a wonderful picture of quarry tiles on the floor in her lounge, which do look very unusual actually, and I really like that. I'd keep that uncovered. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jenny. Huge thanks to everybody that's tuned in. I can tell by the comments, Deborah, that everybody has enjoyed, everyone watching has enjoyed this as much as I have. I could have easily carried on talking to you for into the evening. So if it's okay with you, we'd love to get you back on to attack this in a bit more depth next time as well.
Yeah, that would be lovely. I'd love to do that.
Oh well, thank you so. Oh, sorry, I cut you off then. What were you saying?
I was going to say, and just another, join me on House History Hour, because I'm there every week. I mean, I'm on Twitter far too much anyway. But
just to remind people, how can people find you on social media?
I'm just Deborah Sugg Ryan, all one word. So I'm a bit less active on Instagram than I am on Twitter. I always intend to be a bit more active on Instagram, and I have two Instagrams. One is about house history, is about my research, and then I have another very silly Instagram called Vintage Professor, which is about frocks. So
well, we love silly, and we love.
But it's just, I'm afraid it's just me flouncing around in vintage frocks. So if you're interested in I just love a loud print or a novelty print and a big petticoat. So if that interests you, follow me on Vintage Professor.
So you heard it, guys. Whether it's vintage frocks or house history or design, follow Deborah on social. Do make sure that you join them later on this evening at 7 o'clock. Is it #House History Hour?
That's right, yeah.
And every Thursday from here on in. So yeah, thank you. Honestly, this has been fascinating. I feel like I've learned a lot, and it looks like by the comments our viewers have too. So yeah, I look forward to when we get to do this again.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Oh well, thanks so much, Deborah. Yeah, keep up the wonderful work with the show. We're all absolutely massive fans, and we really hope there's going to be another season, and if there is, we can't wait to see it. So yeah, let's stay in touch, and you and I will speak again soon.
Yeah, brilliant.
Oh well, thanks, Deborah, and thanks so much to everybody who's tuned in and commented as well. We will see you again very soon. Bye now. Bye, Deborah.